Okay, so welcome back everybody to Call to the Bar. This is episode 11, and tonight I am joined by the very special Her Honour Judge Sandy Canavan. I can't thank you enough for joining me this evening. I feel extremely grateful. Her Honour Judge Sandy Canavan is a circuit judge, and you were appointed a recorder in 2010 and then a circuit judge in 2014. You are the deputy resident judge as well as Snaresbrook Crown Court, and also the diversity and community relations judge. And I have actually had the pleasure of seeing Her Honour live in the action on a mini pupillage, and I guess what I took from that was just the demeanour of the way you were in the trial, and also just what all of the advocates were saying about you, all good things. And I must have just kept that name in the back of my head, locked it away in my name box, and I did a little bit of research on you. I sound like a total fangirl right now. And I read the spin-off series that was conducted by the Bar Council, I Am the Bench, and I was so intrigued to listen to your story. And I think it's quite difficult to have a one-on-one with a judge unless you do judge marshalling, and you don't often see judges have like an interview or anything like that. So it was so lovely to see and also hear about read about your upbringing. And there was a quote that stuck with me, and it's still stuck with me to this day. And I've used it so many times on my little platforms, and it was, work harder and longer, be better than the rest, never give up. If you are that good, they cannot say no to you forever. And I just think that's given me so much motivation, and I can't imagine how many of the young aspiring barristers like myself that will motivate. So if I've introduced you correctly, then let's, if you don't mind, can we talk a little bit about the spin-off series? So you talk about how you grew up in Hackney, you attended a state grammar school.
I did.
And you talk about how you've primarily faced two challenges, that being that you were one, a woman, and second of all, you didn't come from the atypical background. And you, first of all, how did you overcome those challenges? How did you decide that you wanted to become a barrister, and what did you do to overcome those stereotypes?
I think being a barrister wasn't sort of something I woke up when I was 5 years old and always wanted to be. And in fact, I was planning on being a vet, because largely speaking, that was the TV programme I liked at the time. It doesn't sound anything like as glamorous as it should do. But I managed to not get into Cambridge to do veterinary science, and did a year of zoology, discovered I hated cutting up animals, so veterinary science clearly wasn't going to be for me. And the only other TV program I'd really had a thing for was an American program called The Paper Chase, which was about law students who were all impossibly glamorous and sat around being very, erudite and glamorous. And I thought, well, I'll give that one a go. So I swapped to King's College London, and I did law there. And then I discovered that I absolutely love law. And so that's how I came to be doing my law degree. When it came to what I wanted to be, I like the front of house stuff. I like I'm an advocate, I suppose, fundamentally. And I liked that part of it. So I thought, well, I want to be a barrister, because I'm afraid I'm old enough that when I was called to the bar, only barristers were allowed to appear in the higher courts. You can all say how well I'm aging. That will be perfect. I'll take that. But it was only in 1991 that the Courts and Legal Services Act meant that solicitors could go into the higher courts. And I didn't want to be in an office somewhere. I wanted to be a barrister. Being a barrister wasn't quite as easy as it sounded, because I had no idea how you became. I mean, I knew the kind of the idea of how you become a barrister because they told you at university. I was lucky enough to get a grant from the Inner London Education Authority to do my bar finals, because I wrote to them and said, look, if you want people like me from my background to become barristers and then in due course judges, then you have to support people like me when we try and do our bar finals. So I got a discretionary grant for that, and then did my bar finals, passed those, and then tried to find pupillage. And I made hundreds of probably applications. So I think I applied to just about every set of chambers in London, and that did what I wanted to do. And very few of them even bother writing back. In those days, there was no, sort of centralised system. You wrote to a set of chambers. A few of them wrote back, and eventually I got a pupillage. And it was in a really nice general common law set. They were all lovely. My pupil master, who went on to become a judge, was well, I absolutely loved him. He used to have a stamp with bullshit that he used to stamp all over your opinions. But I just used to laugh at him. So he was really nice. He was really important to me. And I did the first 6 there. I went and did a second 6 somewhere else. These were both in Lincoln's Inn. And getting the second 6, again, I had no connections. I didn't know people who could, put in a good word for me at work or anything, at their chambers. And it was a challenge. It became very obvious where I did my second 6 that there was no prospect of me being taken on there. That was because women weren't wanted at the bar. If you were going to be a woman at the bar, then you had to be one of 2. You ideally, unless you happen to be, I suppose, related to the senior partner in one of the biggest firms in London, you had to be essentially a girl, a blue stocking, so that you didn't sort of let the side down. I don't know what they thought I was going to do at public events, but apparently, and this was as much the clerks. This was mainly the clerks. The clerks were all, East End Barrow boys in my day. They were incredibly snobbish about who they wanted in their chambers, and they didn't want women. And if they had to put up with a woman, then they had to have somebody who was, pucker. And I wasn't any of those things. And so I did a third 6 at those chambers. And then I did third 6 somewhere else. And then eventually there was a small set of chambers that was just setting up. They were looking for new tenants. And that was my opportunity. I went along, I was interviewed. And I think there's no, I got it because it was a brand new set of chambers. It was a small set of chambers. They were a really good bunch of people. But it wasn't by any stretch of the imagination one of the big sets of chambers. And I only got in because I think I was promising to pay the rent. So that gave me my foot in the door. And it was perseverance as much as anything else. I think I was on about a 4th, 3rd, 6th by the time I actually got a tenancy. And that was kind of how I got my foot in the door. And then after that, it's about moving on from there.
What do you think for you, in your career and your journey, was the turning point where people actually recognised how much of an amazing advocate you were and you are?
I think it was once you start on your feet, once you start actually doing the job. In those days, solicitors used to send reps along to court, and they would watch you do the job. And they would report back to the solicitors. And even the Crown Prosecution Service used to have people in court, and they would watch you. And I think that's at the point at which the kind of meritocracy bit of it can come into play, because people saw me and saw how good I was at doing the advocacy side of everything. And I think I was able to build up a practice because also, being blunt about it, the sorts of people who were outdoor clerks tended to be from the sort of background I was from. And then you could make a connection with them because, I knew where they were coming. I was a bit of a novelty in that sense, I suppose. But it was because people could see you in court and see whether you were good, bad, or indifferent. I think that's one of the things we've lost now, because people don't see you in court anymore. You're sort of... No solicitor really sends anyone to court. CPS don't have anyone in court. And it's hard for them to gauge you as an advocate, as opposed to, you might get the police officer if you're prosecuting and the defendant, but defendants are really, likely to go back and say, oh, what a fabulous job they did, even though I've just been convicted of whatever. So I think it was that was how allowed, getting the opportunity, it was at Staple Inn Chambers, gave me the chance to show people what I could do.
When you get the opportunity now as a Crown Court judge and a circuit judge, do you ever give a little bit of feedback to maybe baby barristers that come before you? And
Definitely.
Yeah.
If someone comes in front of me and they've done really well, and particularly if they're junior, you want to say to them, you're really on the right track. I don't give compliments easily, as anyone who's ever been in front of me will probably be sort of swearing under their breath now. But if someone does something really well, I've written to heads of chambers to say what a good job people have done. I'll tell them what a good job they've done, because it's important that it's not, I mean, I'll tell people when they haven't done things well, but equally it's important to tell them when they have. Mm-hmm. So it is something I genuinely think if someone's done a really good job, I'll tell them they've done a really good job.
Yeah, oh wow, that's so lovely to hear, because it's about getting that feedback, isn't it? Like you've just said, where the elements lost of people watching you in practice and seeing you in the live action. It's really nice to hear that judges actually do certainly give a little bit of feedback when they can. And so then for a little bit, in 2023 you went with the Lord Chief Justice to a academy in Malta. You did a speech to the students, and what did that feel like for you, being able to get the opportunity to speak to the younger generation? And what do you hope to see for this younger generation now as well?
I'm lucky because before I became a diversity and community relations judge, I volunteered for Speakers for Schools, which is Robert Peston's charity. I still volunteer for them. And so going out and talking to kids at school has been something I've been doing probably for about, since I became a judge, probably about 10 years now. Oh. And it's one of the best things I do. Schools come into me, they come into Snaresbrook and they sit in Court 9 and I talk to them, but I also go out to schools. I've got a visit next week and I've got a visit the week after. Wow. And it's fabulous because you get to engage with the kids and tell them, it's about saying to them, you don't have to be a judge, you don't have to be a barrister, but where you're from doesn't determine where you end up. And most of it, you're depending on the age and depending on the sex. Boys, if you've got sort of, 14, 15-year-old boys, they'll be asking things like, who do you like on Love Island? What car do you drive? Everyone wants to know what you get paid. But you will get, out of that group of kids, you'll get 3 or 4 who come up to you afterwards and say, well, I've always been interested in this, but, what do I do? How can I go about it? And that's what you do it for. You do it for the kids who you give to them the idea that just because no one in your family has been a barrister or a solicitor or a judge, it doesn't mean you can't do it. And I absolutely love doing that. It's my favourite part of the job.
So that must be obviously the 2 roles that you've got as well. So you've got the deputy resident judge and that role as well. How do you fit all of that in?
That's a very good question. Yeah, you do, because you have to. People, when you're at the bar, you learn. Being blunt about it, the legal, the kind of, the justice system is kept going by people doing things for free and doing more than they should do because it's the right thing to do. And I don't think it's any different for the judiciary. We're not a 9 to 5. That's it, right? I'm finished. I'm off home now. I've done my list in court. That's it. And I think that comes from the ethics of the bar. I can only speak to the bar because that's where I'm from. The solicitors, that's going that bit beyond. And I think you carry that with you onto the bench. It does mean that your days can be very long or very intense when you're there. I was very lucky to be gifted by, let's go with God, with a brain that moves very quickly, far too quickly for my clerks sometimes. And so I'm able to get through quite a lot of work, but it does wear you out. And there will be days where you are not feeling brilliant and you're presented with the same sort of problems time and time again, when you can be quite, you can get a bit ratty sometimes. We're only human after all, but you try not to. You try to keep that till you go outside and sort of bang your head against the wall. But it just means it's a lot of work. But then that's what I signed up for. I don't have to be a diversity and community relations judge. I didn't have to be the deputy resident. If I agree to do it, then I do it to the best of my ability.
Absolutely.
However, exhausting that may be.
Yeah, I'm sure you do it to the very best of your ability as well. And in terms of the deputy resident judge, then is that basically kind of like running the whole court?
It's there's 2 deputy residents and there's our resident. Rosa runs the court. She's a formidable lady herself, but Gerard and I are there to support her in that. And in fact, because she's had illness since Christmas, she's not been full-time since Christmas. So we've been trying to pick up the slack a bit to try and, relieve the pressure on her. But yeah, it is, from the judiciary's point of view, trying to get the things that we can control, doing the best we can, given the pressures that we're all facing, everybody in the criminal justice system is facing. Trying to, you've got to support your colleagues, you've got to support the staff, you've got to try and get the best outcomes you can for everybody. And our job is to help Rosa do that.
Wow, so it's a lot of pressure. A lot of pressure.
Has its moments.
I bet, I can only imagine. Well, wow, I mean, what a credit. I mean, what an amazing woman you are to be able to do all of that and to do it so effortlessly as well, with still so many people talking about how much of an amazing judge you are. So then,
I'm sure I haven't paid them enough.
No, honestly, it's all I heard on the street on the grapevine was that I was like, I'm going to lock that name away. I'm going to end up emailing her eventually one day, and she's going to ask her to come on a podcast. So in terms of becoming a recorder in 2010, so what actually inspired you to make that transition from becoming a barrister?
I always thought I'd be good at this. I thought I'd be a good judge.
Yeah.
And so making that step from senior barrister to recorder seemed a fairly logical one to take. It's in some ways it's sort of giving it seeing if it fits.
Mm-hmm.
Do you know what I mean? If it fits me, if it fits my skill set, if I enjoy doing it. And so being a recorder gives you that chance, because you're only sitting some of the year, to see, do I think, I think it will suit me, does it? And it did. Mm-hmm. So being a recorder made sense to me in that sense. It was a chance to try out the full-time job before going for it.
And what skills did you notice and realise that you had instilled in you to become a judge throughout that experience?
I mean, I was lucky in the sense that I was taught well as a pupil. And for this, I'd like to give a big shout out to my first ex-pupil master, William Rose, who's now sadly dead. But he was very much, you prepare everything properly. You know your brief, you know your stuff. And that took me through, as a barrister, that was key, was to know your stuff. So when it came to being a judge, that was a skill I took with me. In terms of talking to people, explaining things, you did that as a barrister. If you do it well, you're doing that to the jury. You're explaining things you're asking questions of witnesses, you're explaining things to jurors. And so those were skills that carry over when you're a judge. You're doing the same thing just from a different perspective. So, and also as a criminal practitioner, I knew how the Crown Courts worked. And that's a massive advantage. If you're a civil recorders can become very good judges. But it takes them longer because it's a very alien world, the criminal courts are. Whereas I knew how they worked. I mean, it's quite funny when you go off circuit or you sit somewhere, I didn't sit off circuit, but sit at other court centres and they do things slightly differently. And that would throw you a bit because how do I fit into that? But at least I knew, a friend of mine, the first time she ever saw a jury sworn was her first day doing a trial as a recorder. She'd never seen, even during her sitting in when she was trying to, every trial cracked or, pleaded or something went wrong. And her very first trial was the first time she sat as the trial judge. So I didn't have to worry about all of that. So I took all of that experience of crime into being a judge. But it is a different experience.
Definitely. Was there anything that actually shocked you then in becoming, that you didn't expect to deal with?
I suppose I came from, because you tend to be a senior barrister when you're made a recorder, the standard of advocacy that you are used to is significantly higher than some of the advocacy that you see as a recorder or as a full-time judge. And I suppose I just expected everyone to be of the same standard that I was used to. Mm-hmm. And they're not. And that was a bit of a shock. Yeah. The rest of it is, it's actually really weird. The first time, as a barrister, you're looking at the judge, you're not looking, you look at the witness, you look at the jury, but you're not, but as a judge, you see everything. And that's quite shocking. You suddenly realize, oh yeah, I can see, I've got to keep an eye on the public gallery, the jury, the defendant, the advocates, the staff, my clerk. And that's quite a shock. That's a very different experience than being a barrister. So I suppose that those would be the shocks.
Yeah, absolutely. And I guess as well, marshalling experiences, you probably go from having many pupils ask you a certain line of questions to then getting asked a whole different line of questions when you've got marshals. Yeah. So in terms of advocacy then, what you've just touched on then, is there been any, well, there will have been times, of course. How do you deal with it when you get frustrated at counsel? Because like you said, everybody's human, and sometimes
you have to fight the temptation to say, I'll tell you what, you sit down, I'll do both your jobs, I'll do mine, it'll all be a lot easier and a lot quicker and a lot fairer. You have to resist that temptation, because that's not my job as a judge. You try and keep out of it. You try and keep everything as pleasant as it can be, because this is a difficult experience for everyone caught up in the judicial system, you know, whether you're the defendant, whether you're a juror, whether you're the advocates, whether you're a witness. And you're trying to keep it as pleasant an experience as it can be, given what you're doing and where you are. I think you try not to let your frustrations show. And you go up to lunch afterwards and you go, but you try not to let it show. But sometimes you just have to, you have to sort of make it clear, this is my courtroom, this is how it works, this is what you do. If I make an order, you follow it. If you ask questions, you do them in a way that people can understand. Occasionally you have to ask the odd question just to clarify things for the jurors, or because someone's asked such a convoluted question that I'm struggling to understand it, so I don't know how the witness is supposed to understand it. And you have to step in then, but you have to remember you're not the advocate anymore. However tempting it is, as I said, to say, so all of you sit down and I'll do it all.
Just give yourself another job on top of the ones that you've already got. In terms of then maybe like a pet peeve for you in what you see in either young barristers or even barristers that are established, what do you find the most frustrating in advocacy?
Haven't read the brief.
Right, okay.
They come in front of me. I have always read the case before I come in. I read, if there's applications, I read them. If there's reports, I read them. I know what the case is about. And I'm afraid to say, particularly I think since we went on the digital case, people increasingly come in who do not prepare their cases properly. They will know the bare minimum that they have to do. And then when I ask what I consider to be an entirely sensible question, the answer I'll get is, I'm not it's not my case. Well, it is your case if you're standing in front of me. I'll correct everyone on this. It is your case. You may not be trial counsel, but it's your case. And if you're going to come in front of a judge to do something like a further case management hearing or pre-trial review, or even a pre-trial preparation hearing, then know your stuff. Know the things that you're going to be asked. I'm not asking them to prepare it for trial, but I'm expecting them to know the basics. And lack of preparation is far too common. People think they can wing it. Well, they can't wing it with me, because I will know the case, and I often know more than anybody else does in the case, and that should never happen.
Yeah, and in terms of then maybe after the pandemic and everything going online, do you think that that's maybe made people become a little bit more lazy, or lazy is a bit of a harsh word?
I don't know if it's lazy. I think people just assume, well, it's on the digital case, so you've got it. Mm-hmm. And I'm trying to, because I'm trying to find a chat, the not the lazy explanation for it. And I think they just say, well, it's on the digital case. Yeah, but I'm asking you the question. I want you to know the answer. I want you to tell me. That's your job as the advocate, is to tell me, not mine to tell you what the answer is because I've read the case and you haven't. So I think also with the pandemic, I think one of the problems is that a lot of very good people left the bar. They thought, enough's enough. I've had enough. I'm going to retire if they're more experienced. With junior people, I think them, how on earth they were supposed to survive financially, with no courts pretty much sitting and no trials finishing and no income coming in. And, that's a problem. The other thing, I think the problem I have with the digital cases is that what does happen, that barristers miss out on the collegiate sense of a set of chambers. Because when I was a baby barrister and when I was more experienced, you'd all come into chambers in the evening and people had that opportunity to sit and chat. And you could say to someone else, well, this is what happened, what do you think? And even experienced people would say, well, what do you reckon? And you kind of knew what you were going to do, but you wanted to, and since things have gone digital, people don't go into chambers anymore because they don't have to, because it's all on the computer. And I think that's a real, particularly for junior barristers, that's a loss of a valuable learning experience, because you don't get the chance to talk to more senior people and sort of say, when I did that, was that the right thing, or have I gone completely bonkers? Or say, well, maybe next time you want to do it this way. And the digital case is, I think, the single thing most responsible for people not going into chambers anymore. And if they're not in chambers, and junior people who've just been to the magistrate's court or for their first Crown Court experience can't pop along and say, I'm not sure I got this right, what do you think?
Yeah, absolutely, and hash out and kind of have that family vibe type of thing within the bar. Yeah. And in terms of then CVP, do you think it's, in some situations, of course, it's really helpful, but do you think in some situations it's quite sad because people aren't, when people are overusing it, or when it's getting overused, that you're not seeing the real life advocacy, juries aren't seeing the real life advocacy, but barristers.
I think certainly at Snaresbrook, every barrister has to come to court to do a trial. We don't let advocates be remotely for trials. I think one of the problems with it certainly suits the advocates, because they can do 5 or 6 cases on the same day at different court centres, and that's not a problem for them. In terms of what you can achieve, CVP is not the answer to everything. If you're doing the PTPHs and you want to say to a defendant, look, the evidence against you is overwhelming, go downstairs, have a chat with your client, go and give them some robust advice. You can't do that on CVP because it's just not set up to do that. If something arises during the hearing, either we all have to sort of shuffle out the courtroom and let them talk in the courtroom over the link, or you send them outside and say, right, we'll mute our end and you go and have a chat about it. So I think it takes that personal connection, it takes out of it. And I think that's a problem. I think I can understand why the prisons like it, because they don't have to bring people to court. But and the defendants, for instance, at Snaresbrook, no one wants to leave Thameside because they go back to Pentonville. Nobody wants to go to Pentonville. Having been there, I can probably understand why. But it's very hard to have any kind of proper conversation with the defendant if he's on the end of a link. And likewise, you can't send them off and go and have a chat, or go and talk to the prosecutor and, then come back. And that requires people to be at court. So CVP has its significant limitations in terms of progressing cases. But it has the advantage that people don't have to leave Thameside in our case, and that barristers can do 5 or 6 hearings on the same day. There are advantages to it, but I think, generally speaking, it's better to have people at court if you can do.
Yeah, absolutely. I think as well, for the times I've gone and observed hearings as well, it's so much nicer to see them all in court. It's like you said as well, it's a time for everybody to just connect and speak and communicate.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I agree. And so in terms of then your career, have you ever had a setback or a challenge or was there anything throughout, so like, for example, the COVID pandemic would have affected barristers throughout the 2021 period and 2020 period. Is there anything in your career that...
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Would you mind telling me?
When I was a 3rd, 6th pupil, I had developed a really good practice, baby practice, with a particular firm of solicitors who were a very big, it brought a lot of work into the set of chambers that I was in. And there was no way I was going to get a tenancy in those chambers. And so the clerks were not at all happy with me having developed this particular relationship with a particular firm of solicitors, because the solicitors had said if I moved chambers, they would follow me to the new chambers. Now, no barrister's clerk wants that to happen. And so without going into all the gory details, they engineered a situation which meant that I was told I had to leave chambers straight away. I was told sort of, that's it, you're gone by the end of the week, thank you very much. So I found myself without a set of chambers. I got a job offer to go and be a court clerk, which paid real money back in those days, actual money. And back in my day, you didn't get paid for pupillage. And there I was, I didn't have a set of chambers. I had this offer of a job that I've been considering. And I'm thinking, well, what do I do? Shall I take the safe option, which is take the job as a court clerk? But that's where William Rose, my first six pupil master, came in. And he brought me back to his chambers and got me back on my feet, because I was appalled by what had happened. I'm really shocked and really shaken, I was thrown. And he got me back there and then gave me the chance to go on and find other sets of, another place for pupillage, and then I got the chance to go on to tenancy, and everything else flows from that. So if it hadn't been for William, I wouldn't be here.
That is
absolutely somewhere.
Appalling. That is so appalling. I can't believe that. But I do believe everything happened for a reason. I think William must have came in, saved the gem, because if not, you may not have.
Absolutely. I agree with you. I think everything happens for a reason, and it all worked out in the end. But yeah, that was not the highlight of my career.
No, I bet not. And actually, so interesting. The previous guest that I hosted on the podcast was CEO of New Park Court Chambers in the north. Yeah. And a question I asked him was, do you think there's a difference in the way Chambers is run now compared to what it was run? And I used the example of, I don't know if you've saw the programme Silk with Martha Costello. Yes. I really love that programme. And I said, how Billy the clerk is like a little rascal and he's always doing something he shouldn't be doing. And Rob said, yeah, absolutely. Back then, a barrister, they used to go out in the world, this barrister and clerk, and basically just run the chamber.
Oh, absolutely. And they were like little Hitlers. They ran the set of chambers. And because they provided work to the more senior members of chambers, nobody argued with them. And they were paid a ludicrous amount of money, the first juniors, the senior clerk rather, and the first junior would be the only other one who was paid. And they were all related to each other, or they were the friends of. It was a completely closed market. There were, the only woman I know who worked in any of that. Sorry, for some reason my window is shaking. Oh. Don't know why it's doing that. I think someone's got very loud music outside. Forgive me. The only woman was the wife of the senior clerk who did the books. And that was common. You didn't get women as barristers, clerks. And it was, the only qualification was that you were either the relative of a clerk or you were a friend of of the clerk's family. That was it. And they ran their chambers and everyone was in fear of them.
It's appalling. So it was very much like Silk then.
God, yeah. That really doesn't convey the sheer horror of it.
I bet, well, from what you've just told me, it definitely doesn't. But I said to Rob, well, thank God, selfishly for this generation, that it is ran a little bit more.
Oh, God, no. It's such a different world now. And thank God it is. Put it this way, you learned to be resilient back in the day.
Do you think even the judiciary was run differently back then as well?
Yeah, how you were appointed was completely different because, of course, the Judicial Appointments Commission didn't exist.
Yeah.
And you would get a tap on the shoulder at an appropriate point in your career as a barrister, and someone would say, have you ever thought of being an assistant recorder? And after a certain period of time, it'd be, have you thought about being a recorder? And then, have you thought about going up on the bench? And let me arrange an interview with whoever the presider is. And one of my colleagues, who's sadly gone now, says that's exactly how his career on the bench came about. And it turned out the interview he was having was with his old head of chambers, who was now the presider for the circuit. So, it was very different. The reason the bar was male, upper middle class, white, was because people were picking people like them. So the tap on the shoulder was going to be to a man, an upper middle class man who was private school educated and probably went to Oxbridge, and that retained that's why that was the pattern of the judiciary. And the reason for bringing the Judicial Appointments Commission and that independence was to try and say, no, we're going to appoint on merit rather than on you look like you're one of us. At this point, may I also say, I obviously had to get the permission of my senior presider to do this, because as a judge, you can't just sort of step out into the big wide world. And I did promise Joel Benathan that I would say what a fabulous presider he is. So I'm just slipping that one in, Joel, in case you're listening.
A shout out. I'm sure he'll be really pleased about that.
Straight out to my senior presider.
I know that. Also, can I just shout out as well and say thank you so much for letting her on to do this, because I'm very blessed and very grateful as well. So thank you, because it's a win-win for me. So please keep on being nice to him, because then obviously more opportunities will arise. So, and then what qualities do you value? So you said there just about not reading the brief a little while ago, just a standard courteous, just a quality that maybe people should just have to just be courteous and polite. But what other qualities do you look for in an advocate then?
In an advocate, you want someone who, firstly, you need to know your brief. You need to understand what it is you're doing. So not only do you know the facts, but you have to have an understanding of what you are trying to achieve with the witness and where you are going with your case. And you need to know which points to take and which ones not to take. There are some barristers out there who will take every point. They're incapable of leaving any stone unturned. The trouble is, if you overturn many, 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 many stones, the jury can lose track of the ones that actually matter. And they can get fed up of listening to that. And then they'll switch off and they're not listening to you at all. So what you want to do is have a plan, be prepared to be flexible about your plan, though, because of course I know lots of people write out their questions and then they get quite thrown. Of course, there is no, if answer A, yes, go to question 4. If no, go to question 5. That's all right in a route to verdict. But when you're dealing with actual witnesses as an advocate, that's not how it works. People are unpredictable, and you need to have the flexibility to know where to go with the questions and answers. And the way you do that is by being properly prepared. If you know your brief, you can deal with those. When someone throws you a curveball, you can deal with it. But if you are tied into that's what I'm doing, and then something happens that doesn't fit in your plan, that can throw you completely. And I've seen advocates thrown completely. So you should never be rude. Juries don't like it if you bully witnesses. You should always be, ask a question. That's the other thing. The number of people who go, it was a Tuesday. And you think, is there a question coming? What's that? Ask a question, preferably one question at a time that we can all understand and follow, and then the answer will come. And have a plan for where you're going. So that's the other thing I always think is done badly is by some advocates, not most, but some, is that if, for instance, it's your witness. Well, remember, the jury only ever hear this once. They don't get the statements to take out with them and look through and think, oh, hang on a minute, whatever. So what you want to do is make it ideally chronological. You're telling a story with a witness. So start at the beginning, work your way through and come to an end, because that will fit with how juries are used to seeing things. But if you go to the movies and there's loads of flashbacks all over the place and you can kind of lose track of where you are. Well, if you start asking questions all over the place and there's not, then the jury can lose track of where they are. And if the jury lose track of, they're not going to get the point you're trying to make. So start at the beginning, work your way through, keep it nice and sensible, logical, and ideally chronological.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for sharing that. And in terms of then, doing what's best for the client, say, for example, you were working with opposing counsel, you're having a discussion outside of court before maybe trial, and you come into some sort of, not resolution, but some sort of agreement. And I know some barristers, I've seen it myself as well, especially as a court clerk, and they're having a real fight, and they're rowing and stuff. And I'm like, oh my goodness, I'm not involved in this, but I've got like one ear trying to find out what's going on. But sometimes when they're having a real fight, and I've heard this quite a lot, where one advocate said to the other, just stop it, you're being really difficult and awkward now. And obviously I see the two sides of the coin, because there's one where if you feel like you're doing that for your client and you feel like it's best, and fair enough, stand on business. But in your previous experience, has there been would you say that that's a good piece of advice to take? Know when to be flexible and stop, or would you say no?
It is a good piece of advice. There are times, however, when it's very hard to take that advice.
Yeah.
And I can remember times when I was at the bar where, I mean, a couple of people I just wouldn't talk to without a witness. I mean, it got that bad, or I just wouldn't speak to my opponent at all. And I'd only speak in court because we'd fallen out so spectacularly. So yes, the advice is really, it's really good advice. It's just sometimes hard to remember. You've got to remember as well, you're there as a professional.
Mm-hmm.
You're not supposed to get emotionally attached and involved with your clients, whether it's the prosecution or whether it's the defense from a criminal point of view. You're there to be the kind of grown-up in all of this. And if you start falling out with, you buy into their story completely and get emotionally involved, you're not doing them any favors. So just remember, you're the grown-up in all of this. I have to say, as a judge, when I was at the bar, it really mattered whose fault something was. But as a judge, you don't really care. You just want to get the case moving.
Yeah, of course.
And so I've got people saying, "Oh, they didn't tell me," and I was, "Yeah, I don't care. I just want a resolution at this point. I might care later, but for now, can we just sort it out?" Whereas, of course, as a barrister, I was determined to point out it was someone else's fault, not mine.
Yeah. So then, when you've just said there that the barristers are grown up, do you ever sometimes feel like you're the grown up as well?
Oh God, yeah. I've had to say to people, right, I'm not having any of this. I'm not having this behaviour. You're both professionals. I mean, I had a case where one of the defence counsel, when I rose, was chasing the prosecutor around my courtroom, swearing at him. And I had to come in and say, "Stop this now." My staff came and got me. I said, "You cannot behave like this. You're professionals, not 5-year-olds." And I have had to say that to people. Because part of my job is to make sure that everybody tries to act like a grown-up. So, yeah, I do feel like and I have to say sometimes, when people want to talk through me, and I say, "I'm not your mother. Talk to each other. Sort it out between yourselves if you can. If I have to become involved, I will, but I would much rather that the advocate sorted it out between themselves." But sometimes you just have to say, "Right, enough now. I'm stepping in now."
Yeah, I think the trial that I watched, it was an attempted murder, and I think everybody had that same approach as well. They were like, "We need to get this sorted," behind the scenes, the prosecution and the defence. I was with the defence barrister for that week, and it was a really awful trial as well. And I think you were getting so frustrated. There was a few songs, and I actually remember you stopping the music. It was so funny, and you went, "I just can't even understand what they're saying, so I'm just going to stop this." And I thought, oh my goodness, that poor lady sat there thinking, what are they even rapping about? But it was so funny. And everybody in that trial was getting frustrated behind the scenes, though, because there was so much respect there for you as the judge and obviously the case as well in the trial. Everybody did take that approach to just say this.
It was when you've got quality representation in front of you, which I had in that trial and in many others, it makes my job so much easier.
Yeah.
The worst thing you have is when you don't have that and you have to step in much more as the judge. Mm-hmm. And that wears you out more because, I've got enough to do as my part of the job without having to do your bit too.
I mean, that trial, I won't go into detail about it, of course not, but that trial was a really, really rough trial. I'm sure you've obviously seen worse. But how do you deal with then the emotional baggage? Now, I know you may not get that emotional baggage, but in some cases where you see something that's really horrifying, what do you do to make sure that you are just totally impartial and away from that?
It kind of goes, in order to become a judge, you've been a solicitor or a barrister for 10 years. And in my case, I'd done so many terrible, I'm emotionally stunted in some way. My family are not a touchy-feely family. We don't do emotions very well. That probably serves me terribly well as both a barrister and as a judge. I've always been able to leave things at the door of the court because you have to leave it at the door of the court because otherwise, if you drag it home with you, this job, being a barrister doing crime or a solicitor doing crime and then being a judge doing crime, you'd be a gibbering idiot after, the first week. Because it's awful things that people do to each other all the time. So you have to be detached. You can't get involved. It doesn't mean that you don't have a degree. Of course, you'll have sympathy for people on both sides, but you have to park that because it's not part of your job. And if you can't park it, you shouldn't be doing the job.
Yeah, absolutely. I think I worked as family court clerk, and I remember being so triggered over family law, and that is what gave me the eye opener that I could never, I didn't want to go into that.
Yeah, family is, I did family for a long while,
Yeah.
and it's always so sad. Because I
Yeah.
used to do a lot of care proceedings, and I used to think, because you had these utterly inadequate people who loved their children but were utterly inadequate, unable to prioritise the children's needs, and their children loved them, and it was all just sad. And no one, you never walked out there thinking someone's won. At least in crime, when you were a barrister, you thought, well, there's a conviction or an acquittal. You could walk out and think, yeah, you know. Family, I found immeasurably sad. I wouldn't want to be a family court judge.
No, definitely not. And I, when I was clerking the judges there, I used to ask them, because they came from crime, and they said, you know, it is a challenge. That it's just sad, because, you know, even some judges that I've clerked actually cried in their judgments, and you know, they were Crown Court judges before, so it's not as if they've been hidden away, mollycoddled from what goes on. They were Crown judges before, but it's
I think family's much tougher emotionally than crime is.
I think it is just so miserable, actually. I think that's what it is. So I remember as a clerk sitting there just thinking, this is just so sad. I just thought. So in terms of then oral submissions, what would you say, obviously preparation and keeping it structured and things, but you know, like for a barrister to engage with the jury, what do you quite like seeing in a barrister in terms of...
Don't talk down to the jury. Too many barristers talk down to juries, and they don't like it. Talk to the jury. Keep it, you know, try and keep the planks over the icy thing, you know, the icy pond. Would you walk on it over the chasm? Try and keep those kind of things a bit to a minimum. But talk to them, don't talk at them. And that's, you know, and don't, remember, you're not there because this is you're a failed actor and this is your moment in the sun. You're there to tell your client's case. So it's the same sorts of things in terms of, you want to engage the jury in what you're saying, even if it's the most, you know, nonsense bit of instructions you've got from your lay client and you're having to run a defense which is ridiculous. You need to engage the jury. So don't talk down at them. Bear in mind who your audience are. And so, you know, kind of keep the big words. This is going to sound terrible. I don't mean this in a disparaging way at all, but keep the kind of big words to a minimum. So you want the jury to follow you. And there comes a point where if you keep talking at them, they will switch off. They will not be listening anymore, because they will be thinking, oh God, how much longer? So keep it nice and short, nice and point focused, but again, have a plan for where you're going to start and where you're going to finish, because it's a story you are telling them. You are doing that in your speech. So you are telling them a story. So tell it in a way that they can follow, and they are used to dealing with stories that have a beginning, a middle, and an end.
Yeah, exactly. So I'm guessing, like, if, you know, the judges sat bored stiff, then the jury are going to be bored out of the brains. And I've seen jury members fall asleep on the jury bench.
Yeah, I mean, you know, I'm sure they were just resting their eyes. But you do have to bear in mind that, you know, it's not about you. It's about your client's case. But you do see an awful lot of advocates who think it's all about them. And you know, they've watched too many episodes of, I don't know, Rumpole of the Bailey, Silk, whatever, and they think they're Evan Marshall Hall reborn, and it's all about them. And you're thinking, lovely, but the jury all look like they're about to commit suicide. So, you know, do you think maybe you want to keep it a bit more, you know, some kind of form to all of this, some idea that they know there's going to be an end, and that's, you know, one of the things you need to engage your jury.
Yeah, absolutely. Also, just a little bit of an off-topic question: what is your opinions on female barristers, and just women in general as well, who like to maybe wear high heels, and they like to wear a blazer, and they like to just, that's their way of expressing themselves? What do you say to that? Because I've had so many mixed pieces of advice of, yes, do what you want and express yourself, within reason, of course, but don't feel like you can't wear not so much like an outfit, but more like maybe like say lip gloss or maybe lipstick or something like that.
You're there to be a professional.
Yeah.
You're not there to be Britain's next top model. Having said that, when I was at the bar, I was known because I wore the wackiest hosiery. Cost me a fortune from all but it was, it was my way of expressing myself. And also there was absolutely nothing in the code of conduct about hosiery, because I suppose when it was drafted, they didn't think about women. And so I could get away with it. And I did. I wore wacky hosiery. But I still wore a suit and I still looked professional. You can look professional and wear your lipstick, and that's fine.
Mm-hmm.
But the point at which you no longer look like a professional, you're doing your client no favors with the jury. Because the sad fact is, the juries are expecting, they don't want to see someone wearing a Hawaiian shirt under their gown.
No.
They want to see a professional. So I am fussy about people. I tie my hair back.
Mm-hmm.
Not today, because I've just because I came straight from court to do Pilates, and I've come straight from the shower to do
Oh,
it.
wow.
So I'm afraid you got me with damp hair, but I tie my hair back, and it's not very long hair, but I tie it back when I come in. And if I can make the effort to look professional, then you should make the effort to look professional. Express yourself. Wear 8-inch heels if you want, although God knows your feet will be killing you by the end of the day. But don't come in looking like, if what you look like is a diversion to what you're saying, then that's not fair to your client.
Mm-hmm.
We are professionals. We're supposed to be in a professional environment. There is a code of conduct. And so within the bounds of that, look like a professional. I wear, as anyone who's been in my courtroom will know, I wear rings, I wear earrings. I know some of my colleagues, I remember a colleague who I won't name, who once said she couldn't hear someone because they had a particularly loud cocktail ring on. I'm not going to do that, but I will tell people to tie their hair back, man or woman. You come into my courtroom looking like a professional. I have also been known to suggest after the hearing that they might want to invest in washing their bands and some spray on starch. Because again, if you come in, it's all manky and dirty and yuck, and this is women as well as men, then I don't think your client's going to think, well, they're not taking their own appearance very seriously. How are they taking my case very seriously? And the same goes for the jury, because people are swayed by those kind of visual things. So I have been known to say that you might want to invest in some new bands or some spray and starch.
That's honesty's best policy, to be honest. I think I would appreciate the honesty.
Express yourself, yes, but not to the point of distraction.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's another thing I was going to ask. So in terms of the jury then, have you noticed any trends and changes in juries in the past 10 years?
Juries are, well, I mean, the real changes in things like we have people with disabilities much more coming onto juries now, because now you can even have deaf people as jurors.
Yeah.
In the old days, you didn't really see anyone with a disability. They would have been excused from jury service because there weren't the provisions. I mean, we still struggle with people in wheelchairs because the courts are not really, a lot of the court buildings just can't cope with jurors and wheelchairs and accessibility. And particularly if you've got one toilet for the entire jury in retirement and it's not wheelchair friendly, that does present practical difficulties. In terms of jurors themselves, some of them, mostly I think they take it just as seriously as they always did. But you do get some who, I think perhaps don't quite get what they're doing, that, their world is probably regulated more by TikTok and Instagram than it is by, the news and whatever. And they find it quite hard to be told to be somewhere at a certain time, and your lunch is between now and then you come back, and there are people who can struggle about that. And I suspect that's probably, this sounds terrible, I'm blaming young people today. I'm not saying, but I think it may be just that they're not used to that regulated regime that you have in a courtroom.
Yeah, I agree. I was actually having a conversation with somebody a couple of weeks ago, and I said that, especially as my experience as being a clerk as well, I was really gobsmacked at how um, people just didn't really take the court system very seriously anymore. The way people spoke to judges, even in criminal courts, I've like judge marshalled with really great judges, and well, they've all been great, and the way that they've been spoken to was outrageous. And I remember thinking, I bet 10, 15 years ago this just wouldn't have happened because
You're
people.
absolutely right. There has been a general falling away in respect for, I think, most professions, and certainly the judiciary. And it's not just in the, members of the public and the like. I think with advocates, there has been a fall in the way there are certain people who I would never have spoken to a judge in the way certain people have spoken to me.
Mm-hmm.
I just wouldn't have, it's such an alien concept. And yet that's not standing your ground with a judge. That's perfectly proper. But just being outright rude.
Mm-hmm.
And the other thing with jurors, they don't, you get to what they wear to court. Now, my usher, Sue, is old school usher, and she's brilliant. But so jurors like come in shorts, and they come in shorts once. And she sends them away, and she sends them away with a, you're coming in, it's very serious, and she doesn't let them come in wearing shorts. Or we had one woman came in a crop top, one of those boob tubes.
No.
Sitting on a jury in a boob tube.
No.
And I mean, and there was another one, a trans, she said, well, she's going out this evening, she's got her hair in rollers. And it was kind of like, well, I had a choice of sending them away, and this was in a sex case involving young witnesses, or as it turned out, I had this woman sitting there with her hair in a big kind of big rollers and a big sort of, just kind of, what was her name? Hilda Ogden, except sort of massive on her head through the whole day. She was the juror. Now, the idea of coming into a courtroom wearing rollers was just
foreign.
Yeah.
And from an avid roller wearer, I always have my hair in rollers, but I would never in a million years do anything with the
You have them in rollers in the middle of the courtroom. But that has changed. And as I said, I think there is general falling away in respect for professions generally. And I don't think the judiciary are any more immune to it than anyone else is.
No, I agree. And like I said, I've seen that firsthand myself, and I've been like, oh my goodness, the way that people have. I mean, like, I remember my first marshalling experience. You were really excited and you're really nervous, and you put judges on a pedestal, because and I think that's just, you put anybody who's in the criminal justice system on a pedestal because of how much hard work goes into the profession. But I just think that the way they turn up to court in defendants in tracksuits is just absolutely not respect at all.
The clever ones turn up in suits and ties, booted and suited, because that impresses the jury. They've made an effort.
Yeah.
The other ones turn up looking like, as you say, in their trackies and their, the big eyelashes and the big lips and whatever. Yeah.
Exactly. So in terms of then, just real quickly, in terms of like youth crime, obviously it is getting significantly worse in London, and there's obviously the knife crime pandemic that everybody's talking about, epidemic, that everyone's talking about, and just, the drill music and all of that. What if you could say anything, because this podcast gets sent to schools and to colleges around the northeast, what would you say to, because I couldn't think of anybody better to have on their screens than you, what would you say to young students?
I'd want to say to them, the problem is, by the time they realise what a mess they've made of their life, they've made the mess. And and all your mates, all the people in the gang who you think are really cool and wonderful, if you get 18, 19, 20 years in prison, they're not going to be waiting for you when you come out. You're going to come out, you're going to have lost the best years of your life in, Her Majesty's Prison, Pentonville, or wherever. And what you want to say to them, there is so much more that you could be. There is so much more that you can do than just being part of a gang. But that's the problem, is you want to say to them, if I could put an old head on your shoulders, if I could put the head of the people who, are at the other end of those sentences now, and their lives are gone, and their families have had to live with seeing them, once a month on a visit, the consequences for their families and for their futures, it's just not worth it. But I accept that I'm saying that, You know, and I know you don't have to do that. I mean, the funny thing about that trial you saw was, of course, I knew all of the area because where I grew up. And at the end of the trial, one of the officers came up to me and said, Judge, do you mind me asking? I said, asking questions. I said, depends, but far ahead. He said, do you live in Hackney? I said, no, but I grew up there. So all of those areas, I knew where. He said, we thought you knew the area because you kept saying, no, that's so-and-so road, or this is so-and-so road. I thought, well, yes, I do know the area because, you know, my mum worked in the Marks and Spencers that they were running past at one point, and, you know, that's where we did our shopping, and that. So, you know, I've got to hear from Hackney, and you don't have to end up as a defendant in a courtroom just because you're from Hackney.
No.
Well, these days, Hackney is so she that probably they're more likely to be the barristers. Parts of Hackney is so she. The Clapton Park estate has not become she.
Yeah, no, and I think what you said earlier on in the podcast as well, don't let your background or anything about you define what your future is going to be. Everybody has a brighter future ahead of them. It's in your hands, isn't it? The world is literally your oyster.
It is. You know, I was very fortunate. I've had great family, great backing, you know, a good moral compass in, you know, we all were instilled with a good moral compass. And I don't think children are born with good moral compasses. I don't think they're born with one at all. That's what parents are for. And we were, you know, I've been very, very lucky that my parents taught us right from wrong from the early days. And I was more frightened of my mother and finding out if I'd transgressed in some way than I would have got any pleasure from transgressing. I'd have been so worried that she'd find out. I mean, don't get me wrong, I'm not suggesting I was, you know, I was completely goody two shoes, but even so, I was more terrified of my mother. But it gave me, you know, it gives you that roadmap for how you behave thereafter.
It's about that parental respect now, though, isn't it, as well? Like, you know, children are getting exposed to TikTok and different things. And I always say to my little brother, who's only 10, stay in school, you know, even if you don't want to do anything with your degree, just stay in school, because I think it gives them that alignment and stability.
Absolutely.
Structure.
I think the problem with social media is that kids look at it and they think, I can be an influencer and I can make a fortune and I can have all of these things that all of social media is telling me all the time I have to have if I'm going to be anyone. And I think parents have probably kind of, you know, resigned responsibility. They give kids smartphones at an age where they shouldn't be anywhere near a smartphone. They're not looking at what their kids are looking at on smartphones, and what's available on smartphones is so extreme and so frightening that I worry about the future and about things like the idea of consent. You know, what boys are being taught is acceptable sexual behaviour. The pressure's been put on everyone about, if you don't have this, you're nothing. If you don't have that, you're nothing. How that pushes people into crime. And that's just on a personal level. I think that's a really worrying trend. I've no idea what you do about that one.
Yeah, I had that noted down as well. Just, you know, some of the language that comes out of little boys now and things like what they think is right and wrong is just.
If you ask kids, when I go on, you know, give my talks, you ask them about consent, it's frightening what they think. I can remember, you know, well, if a girl turns up to give one boy oral sex, that means she's got to give all his mates oral sex as well.
Oh my goodness.
Because you wouldn't have turned up with me and my mates if you didn't want to have oral sex with all of us.
That's so worrying, isn't it? I mean, yeah, so worrying. And even just them being exposed to that type of language at such a young age as well. And I do think it's the world of technology now with all the smartphones and all of that.
I think everybody worked out how to do something before deciding whether they should do it.
Yeah. Just went crazy with it.
Yeah, it's all got away from us, and the genie, you know, the genie's out of that bottle, and I've no idea how you put it back in.
No. On a bit more of a positive note then, what is your proudest moment in your career? What are you most proud of yourself for?
What am I most proud of myself for? What am I most proud of myself for? I suppose I'm going to be a bit cheesy about this, but the look on my mum and dad's face when I was sworn in as a judge.
Oh, wow.
I was there, my family were there. You're only supposed to take about 4 people. I managed to get 13 in because I had all my family there. And that look on mum and dad's face when I was, you know, got the full-time job. That. Because my mum and dad did everything for us. And, you know, I'm one of now 4 professional children from a council estate in Hackney. And we wouldn't have done that without them. And it was finally being able to give something back, something that they, you know, they got something out of.
Yeah.
So, yeah, that would be my proudest moment.
Like we've achieved something and it's down to the help of you and the direction.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh, that's amazing. That is so touching. I think that would be definitely one of my favourite moments in the future, is definitely to just accomplish something, to be able to say to the family, I've done that. And what do you think your best, 2 questions here, best skill is and best personality trait is? I think you're hilarious, so I'd definitely say your humour is definitely up there with one of them.
My best skill set is advocacy. I'm a fabulous advocate. I'm sorry, it sounds terrible, but I really am. It was something I found easy. Advocacy.
It's just like just something instilled in you. You're born with a gift, and you were born with that.
Exactly. It's the difference between, one of the things I know you were talking about was what's the difference between a good advocate and a great advocate.
Yeah.
I think in terms of being a great advocate, you have to be born with that ability. It's like being able to paint, or being able to sing, or being able to dance. It is, or, you know, whittle wood or whatever. It's a skill you're born with. You can develop it and make it better. But if you haven't got that gift, you can be good, but you'll never be great. And I was lucky enough to have that, you know, have that. And that's not as a result of anything I did or said. It was just I had that in me. And then you work with it. So that would be my best skill set. In terms of my best characteristic, if I said patience, I think a lot of people who work with me would start laughing out loud, and I know my family would. What is my best skill? I like to think I keep things as pleasant as they can be.
You definitely put the colour into things, and from my observation, so down to earth, you know, humorous, and not like a rod up your backside or anything like. I know.
No, I like to think I am pretty much down to earth and pragmatic.
Yeah, straight to the point.
Yeah, absolutely. Don't waffle with me. I hate waffling. Yeah,
just straight to the point. Oh, fantastic then. So I guess just to sum up, just what would you give a bit of advice now to an aspiring barrister?
Aspiring barristers, I mean, in some ways you're lucky because there's lots of work out there now.
Yeah.
And that hasn't always been the case. Try not to overstretch yourself. Give yourself a chance to learn. That doesn't mean wait until you're 20 years cool before you do your first Crown Court trial. Equally, you see people who are too junior doing trials that they should never have gone near. So give yourself, if it's something you know, give yourself a go as a barrister. Yeah. If you try and fail, you've tried.
Yeah.
If you think, well, I can't possibly do that because it's too much, or it's, you know, I'm not good enough, I'm not from the right place, I'm not from the right background, I'm not sure I've got the skill set, give it a go. If you look back at the end of your life and say, well, I tried it, I tried all of this, it didn't work, but I tried it. I think that's a much more satisfying place, I can say, being the age I am now, then I wish I'd tried that, but I didn't. I wish I'd done that, but I didn't. I took the easy option, a bit like going back to that job as a court clerk. I mean, no disrespect to court clerks, but that was the easier option at the time. That was the safe option, and I didn't take it, and I'm so glad I didn't.
Well, because you were destined for something. Not that I'm saying court clerks are not great, but I'm saying you were destined for something bigger in your life.
My destiny was different.
Yeah.
My, you know, and I tried and I found it, and I have loved pretty much every minute of my professional career since. Not the bits outside of the bits in court. Love it. It's been a brilliant job. It is a brilliant job.
Yeah, definitely. Oh, I cannot thank you enough. I cannot express my gratitude enough to you. I think you're an amazing woman from what I've just had the pleasure of having you on virtually on my screen.
Oh, thank you for asking me.
No, honestly, I was thinking I need to hunt her on a down, and I thought, well, how am I going to do this without coming across like a stalker? So I thought, let me just go through the.
If I see you popping up outside of Court 9, I might change my view.
Yeah, I'd be like, oh, hello, can I just have a word? So I thought, let me just go down the general crime inquiries on the government website rather than just go, like, because I found you on my justice, and I thought I cannot email her off my justice email straight away. So I got the permission first, and then I was like, oh, she's replied to me. I was like having a total fangirl moment. Now I was just like, Ellie, come on, you need to like get a bit of your aura back, a bit of coolness, and calm down with the fangirling. But I'm truly so
You're
happy.
very kind.
Thank you so much for joining me, and I will upload the episode onto YouTube as well, so everybody can watch it. If anybody would like to see the interview that Harona did with the Bar Council, I'll pop that on the social media platforms as well. And yeah, I just can't thank you enough, and I hope to see you maybe one time in the future as well. Maybe I'll be before you, hopefully, if I become a barrister.
You'll be prepared. You'll have a plan, and you'll be fabulous. I'm sure.
Yeah, my plan, my hair tied back, and they'll be straight to the point, no waffling.
Absolutely. What more can a girl ask for?
Exactly. Well, thank you so much, and
No problem at all.
evening as
Anytime.
well.
Thank you very much for having me.
Take care. Bye, Judge. Bye.
No, I've got to try and get out of this now.
Right, I will end it for you, and then you won't have to.
Thank you.